My name's Polly and I'm the Artistic Director of Changing Relations. My role is on the ground with our creative production, our project management and creating the content that we do. So International Women's Day this year, the theme is breaking the bias, and the theme of our kind of 11 o'clocks today, cheers with a cup of coffee, is switching the stereotype. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about transformational leadership, kind of what I understand that to be and how it fits into the work that we do. So switching the stereotypes and transformational leadership in the workplace. Breaking the bias is the theme, and you're probably all really familiar with some of the phrases man up and who wears the trousers. So man up, a shaming term to confess, fulfill your responsibilities as a man and take control, put your feelings aside and act against your own wishes for the benefit of others. It's not really a phrase that we want to be using. We have done lots of projects that explore the negative outputs of kind of these masculine stereotypes on both men and women globally. And who wears the trousers was a theme for a project that we've been recently running with Durham University and Hillbead College, which again, you know, as a term, it's thrown around commonly, but it's suggesting which one of you is wearing the trousers, implying which one of you is the man, and whether that's in the workplace or as a relationship, it's suggesting that that person who is wearing the trousers, typically a man, has the power and has the control. Again, we create projects that try and challenge these stereotypes. But what I wanted to use as, I love language, wanted to use today was the, if I can get my slide to change, there we go. Ask you what comes to mind when you hear someone use the phrase like a girl. Just on the screen there, you can see a piece of creative writing that was created by a 14-year-old female student in response to one of our projects when we were exploring kind of switching the stereotypes of masculine and feminine. I'll just give you a couple of moments whilst we check out things to see what you pop in the chat. So we've got people popping in, thinking of being like a girl as being more emotional, implying weakness. Running like a girl suggested being weak. Yeah, derogatory comment about how feminine you are, whether it's used towards a man or a woman. Like a girl, similarly to man up, is a phrase that's used as a shaming term. It's not often used as a complimentary term. So we're looking at language today, or I'm particularly looking at language, and that like a girl, as I say, I've not heard it used as a complimentary term. Similarly with how we imply something, being the boss versus being bossy has a different context. I'm sharing a few articles today to kind of explore the wider thinking around the subject matter. So this article, back in December, a Guardian article, held the title Pushy, Gobby and Rude, and why do women get penalised for talking loudly at work? This was an article, if we can share our PowerPoints with anybody after the session that wants them, these are all live links on there so you can see the wider article. But it was a female physicist and government lobbyist, Judith Howell, who won an unfair dismissal claim. She said that she noticed that in the government, it's an incredibly male-dominated. She said, I find that if I said something, I'd get picked up on by someone in the meeting. I'd have to push a bit harder. I'd have to be a bit more strident. I'd literally have to interrupt and not shout, but raise my voice. And some people found that very annoying. She said, in a career that required the ability to make a case as forcefully as possible, she didn't see anything wrong with it, but sometimes she'd be taken aside, told that she was overconfident or pushy, and she'd think, I'm literally doing the same as the men. Similarly, in this article, Sonia Mortlock's experience suggests that how loud a woman can be is multiplied when race is also a factor. Mortlock is a retired 67-year-old who lives in Southend and has Jamaican heritage, and she said in her former job as a housing association, she endured frequent comments about the tone and volume of my voice, even when I thought I was being perfectly respectful and polite. She said, I do have a loud voice, but I'm not rude, but people said I had an aggressive attitude. I'd see white men literally shouting at meetings and nothing would happen. And so sometimes I did become indignant, but that just made matters worse. Emma Weiner, who is a corporate speaking coach, has said that if women use more masculine turns of phrase, more direct language, shorter sentences, gesture, and if they combine that with a higher pitch, they'll often be labelled as difficult. So we're looking at the idea of switching the stereotype. These pushy, gobby, rude women, this idea of being like a girl as something that is weaker and less than. What we've been looking at more recently is research that's showing how women leaders have shone during the pandemic. It's asking men to take note. In this particular article, the pandemic has demonstrated the prowess of women when the chips are down. It suggests, or studies suggest, that female political leaders particularly have coped well with the pandemic differently and often better than men. An analysis of 122 speeches showed that men used war analogies and fear-based tactics more often. But in contrast, Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand and Angela Merkel in Germany and other female leaders have focused on families, children, and vulnerable groups, and with messages of compassion and social cohesion. US analysis even indicated that states with female governors had fewer COVID-related deaths than those with male governors. Research proves that when managers move from a take charge to a take care approach, they improve psychological safety, trust, and it also encourages risk-taking and innovation. In the disrupted 2020, successful leaders of any gender will benefit if they become less directive and more relational. For most of industrial history, the default has been that a man is in charge. Think manager, think men. However, what's being suggested is to transform global businesses, HR departments should rewrite their list of desired leadership competencies. This means rethinking traditional models that reward take charge skills such as command presence, drives for results and takes control. Instead, pruning these back, making more room for relational abilities such as earning respect, inspire high performance, and working collaboratively to get the job done. There's lots been said about how women have been doing a better job during the COVID-19 crisis. In this article, when discussing careers of female leaders, there's a phenomenon referred to as the glass cliff, relative term to the glass ceiling, but it describes the invisible barrier to advancement that women often face when they're up for promotion. The glass cliff describes the idea that when a woman is in trouble, when a company is in trouble, that a woman is put in charge to save it. When women are finally given a chance to prove themselves in a senior position, they're handed something that's already broken, where the chances of failure are high. But as we have learned during the COVID-19 crisis, women leaders are doing a better job, not just when they're given something that's tough to handle. To better understand what's driving the difference to these better engagement levels, questions have been asked: why are women leaders seen as more effective? Research has looked at competencies that direct reports ranked as most important during the crisis. Noticeably, respondents put greater importance on interpersonal skills, such as inspires and motivates, communicates powerfully, collaboration, teamwork, and relationship building, all of which women were rated higher on. Female leaders expressed more awareness of fears that followed what people might be feeling, concern for well-being, and confidence in their plans. So where did all the pushy, gobby, rude women go then? Or is this merely a perception that we need to start changing? Companies with female leaders outperform those dominated by men. So it's not just about how people feel in a business. To mark International Women's Day, Labour collected data from the House of Commons Library. It cited McKinsey research that shows companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams were 25% more likely to have an above average profitability than companies at the bottom, while companies with more than 30% female executives were more likely to outperform companies that don't, according to research from academics at the universities of Glasgow and Leicester. However, only 8 women and no women of colour are currently employed as CEOs in the FSTE 100. The data shows that women-led SMEs contribute to about 85 billion to the economic output, but research shows that only 16% of small businesses 16% of small business employers and 1 in 3 entrepreneurs are women. There's further evidence that fewer women get access to finance and business loans, with only 15% of banks financing applications and 22% of new primary business bank accounts opening from women. Labour's Shadow Secretary for Women's Equality has said, unless we actually back women in business, then we're going to be losing out on a huge amount of potential economic activity and prosperity that all our communities need. It's no coincidence that qualities of good communication, collaboration, relationship building are effective leadership qualities. But does sex really matter? The idea of transformational leadership explores gender role identity. So gender roles, our society has a set of ideas about how we expect men and women to dress, behave, and present themselves. Gender roles in society mean how we're expected to act, think, speak, dress, conduct ourselves based on our assigned sex. For example, girls and women are generally expected to dress in typically feminine ways, be polite, accommodating, and nurturing. Men are generally expected to be strong, aggressive, and bold. A large body of research has emerged on gender and leadership, especially on the influence of leaders' sex and perceptions of their leadership style. One variable often neglected is the leader's gender role identity. So regardless of whether a person is identifying as male or female by sex, this new research is starting to explore how their gender role identity presents itself. So gender role identity defines a stereotypical individual self-perception as masculine or feminine and encompasses qualities that are regarded as ideal for each sex in society. So those male characteristics of assertiveness, striving for achievement, and competitiveness, in contrast to women's expectations to display nurturing, benevolence, personal caring. While there's been progress suggesting a rise in acceptance of androgynous leadership, researchers stress that actually the stereotype of a successful leader is still defined as masculine. Think male, think leader. But now we're shifting to a growing body of research and literature that argues a specific form of leadership, transformational leadership. And this is becoming more feminine. So we're looking at research that's backing up why women are dealing better in crisis, why women are contributing to the economy and making businesses run better. Is this about sex, or is this about celebrating femininity? Shouldn't we all, in fact, shift seeing being like a girl as an aspiration and no longer an affliction? Perhaps one of the most valuable parts of all the data and research that's been collected is to look at leaders needing to pivot and learn new skills. Those who display honesty, integrity, and sensitivity, who understand the stress, anxiety, and frustration that people are feeling, these traits are often being displayed by women. However, as the crisis continues and intensifies in many places, what we're looking at is, shouldn't all leaders, regardless of gender or sex, strive to meet those needs and become more feminine?
Hi everyone, so I'm Lisa. I am going to take a little bit of time to consider some other ways in which our gender biases might be playing out in the workplace. So some of you might have been aware of the Gender Equality in the North East Workplace report that we produced last year together with Dr. Stephen Burrell of Durham University. And when we're thinking about breaking the bias, which is obviously the theme of this year's International Women's Day, there's some really interesting statistics that came out of this report that we're going to have a little look at. So of the 72 professionals who participated in our survey, 84% felt that their workplace culture encourages gender equality and inclusion, which on the face of it sounds incredibly positive. It sounds like it's all great. However, when you dig a little bit deeper, there are some percentages on more specific issues under the umbrella of gender equality that prompt us to ask if everything really is as positive as that percentage suggests. So as we're an arts company, I am going to share some artwork with you, which comes from our Who Wears the Trousers zine. And what I'd love you to type into the chat is, when you see this image and you think about the pandemic, and in particular about lockdown, perhaps about homeschooling, what comes into your mind? There was also some research that was undertaken by the University of Sussex that was very illuminating. So what we've got here is that from our own report based in the Northeast, 57% felt that women were affected worse by the pandemic, compared to only 3% who thought that men had been affected worse. In the University of Sussex report, they're sort of a little bit more specific in the way in which that is articulated. They've got 67% of women with work commitments describing themselves as having been the default parent during lockdown, with that slightly increasing up to 70% there for those who felt that they were completely or mostly responsible for homeschooling. So there's some of the numbers. We're going to switch to having a look at some of the comments that our survey respondents actually made. I've picked this one to start with because it chimes with that opening statistic that suggests there isn't really a gender equality issue for us to get vexed about. I had somebody saying, I've had both men and women struggling to come into work when their children have been sent home due to a COVID bubble. I see no difference that it affected women or men differently. So whilst we had that one comment there, actually there were quite a lot more comments that chimed more closely with those statistics from the University of Sussex there. So we've got here, mothers with kids have been absent from team meetings much more than those without, or even dads. I don't know of any men that did homeschooling. It was left to the female to juggle both. Unfortunately, women are still expected to take on the lion's share of the caring burden. Women seem to be the lead on all childcare and homeschooling. Therefore, their work was impacted more due to these added responsibilities and pressures. So going back to that initial 84% of people telling us that their workplace encourages gender equality, this calls us to ask, how does that seemingly positive picture marry with 57% of that same group of people telling us women were affected worse, and creating all of this picture here with the actual comments? And the question that it prompts for me is whether we culturally are seeing parenting as being a private family issue rather than being the business of the workplace. Now, it's completely fair to say that the pandemic was very much an extreme and extraordinary period of time, but it can also be that such periods of time are quite useful for us to hold a magnifying glass up to some of the tendencies that might be anyway around us in our culture. So just going on with this question of whether or not it's a private family issue, I picked out this quotation here from the researcher conducting that piece of work at the University of Sussex. Because men tend to earn more, their jobs have more often taken priority, with women more likely to be left providing the childcare. So that seems to be implying that the increased juggle for women is a private family decision. But is this right? We're going to have a little dig into some more of the findings from our report to help us unpick that a little bit. So we've got 35% of people who felt that women's productivity was worse affected by the pandemic, compared to only 5% for men. We've got 28% of people who felt that women's career progression was worse affected, compared to no people thinking that about men's career progression. So this really indicates quite a double bind for women. If we just flick back to that previous slide there, this implication that it's a private family decision, men are earning more, therefore their jobs have taken priority. But if women's capacity to get on and earn more in the workplace is affected by that situation, they're stuck a little bit in a loop there in terms of their ability to get on and their capacity to be able to be working more, or for their work to be prioritised. So just going to seg into another little bit of art here. This is artwork that came from two sequential projects that we ran that led to public exhibitions that were shown in various locations around County Durham. The projects were called Men's Voices and Stepping Out of the Box. They involved professional artists together with groups of men and also groups of girls and boys in some County Durham secondary schools. So what I'd like you to do just for a moment is have a little look at the pictures and the poetry there, and think, what does it make you think of in terms of the situation for women and how this actually is a workplace issue rather than purely a private family matter to be resolved at home? I'll have a read of the poem just to get you thinking about it. We've got a message from Santa here. Santa sat in his grotto, a boy seated at his side. And what do you want for Christmas, he asked. A dolly, the boy replied. A dolly, oh boy, do you jest? An odd toy for a boy to request. Santa gave a chuckle, adjusted his buckle, puffed out his robin red chest. Surely a truck or a bike or a ball would suit a little boy best. For me, what's really interesting about this content that was produced, as I say, together with young people and professional artists, is it takes us back to the concept of gender roles that Polly was exploring in relation to leadership. Who is it that societally we are expecting to be doing the caring? Who is it that we see as the nurturers? And if we're thinking about the workplace, how is this reflected in our organisational culture? So not just in terms of the policies that we might have about paternity leave, about maternity leave, but also in terms of the banter and perhaps the underlying expectations that we might have of men and women, and what that then leads to in terms of our behaviour, what we might encourage or discourage. So to further the point a little bit, I've picked out some quotations, some of which are from the report that we conducted and some of which are from other pieces of research conducted in the UK. So at the top there, you've got, as recently as 2018 to 2019, 17% of people said they disapproved of mothers with children under 3 working full time, whilst 4% expressed this view when asked about fathers. From Dr. Marianne Stevenson of the Women's Budget Group, you've got this acknowledgement that there's still an underlying assumption that care is women's work, even when they're the primary earner. From Anne Frank of the Chartered Management Institute, we've got this point that actually fathers are vital to progressing gender equality for mothers. I know that Polly started off her segment talking about that phrase man up, which, you know, if you're thinking about International Women's Day, you might not be thinking so much about men, but actually there are ways in which we need to be thinking about men and women and gender roles in the round. And this last comment I found really interesting from a survey participant in our report that we conducted last year. Women are given much more leeway when it comes to phoning in sick or needing time off. Men are expected to get on with it and come in. Now, whilst that is to do with sickness rather than necessarily children, I think it's quite illustrative of the culture and the expectations that might be around men versus women in the workplace. Is it fair to say that there's more of a culture of almost workaholism for the men, of, you know, show up, be there, crack on, there's no time for slacking, you know, very much that man up attitude that Polly was referencing at the beginning yet there. Whereas for women, perhaps because maybe we're not taking them so seriously in the workplace, maybe we're more focused on the fact that they might have caring roles and we're not so much seeing that the men might have those caring roles as well. We're giving women a little bit more leeway, which in the main isn't necessarily helping. So thinking back to that statistic that I started off with, that 84% of people in businesses in the Northeast felt that their workplace was doing pretty well to create gender equality. That's great if Northeast businesses are being proactive about gender equality in the workplace. I suppose the point that I would like to leave you with is that cultural norms are actually quite tricky to shift because they often lie just beneath the surface. They can be quite subtle. They can seem so normal that we might even notice that they're making a difference to our behaviour. So those little comments like man up, or, you know, that comment about, oh, it's much easier for a woman to be able to call in sick than a man. There's little subtle things that make up the culture all around us, both in society, but also in the organisational culture of the workplace that we're in. What are they encouraging? What are they discouraging? What are they challenging or not challenging? So we have to acknowledge that culture change isn't easy. And I've, to finish off, picked out this quotation from the chair of the Women and Equalities Committee in the House of Commons, MP Caroline Noakes, because I really like that she says it's not good enough to look at policies. Now she's making the point that we need to women need even more help to get back to where they were. But I like that emphasis on it not being good enough just to look at policies, because for us, I think what we're very interested in is this aspect of culture, the culture around us, the ideas that we have, a lot of which lie beneath the surface, and we might not realize what it is that we're encouraging or discouraging in the little phrases that we might use, the reactions that we might have. So this is very much an invitation to start noticing those messages that we're creating and what we're implicitly encouraging, and what actually it might be possible for us to start challenging to create a culture that is genuinely inclusive, in the sense that it's not just sort of saying, oh, that's a private family decision. Well, actually, are there some ways in which we can be setting the tone in the way in which we're celebrating men taking on caring roles in the workplace, but also, celebrating the leadership qualities that women are displaying, as Polly was discussing earlier.